2 months into being the mom of two under two, I was overtired and overstimulated. I called my own mom in the middle of the night, crying and in need of advice. Sleep when the toddler sleeps, she said. Okay, but when do I sew? You don't get to sew right now, she said. Welcome to motherhood. She was only trying to help, passing on advice that had been passed on to her, but I knew that giving up the thing that ignites my soul would turn me into a bitter and resentful mom, which would be way worse. There had to be a better way. So I turned to my friend Hanne, who says that being the CEO of a software company was 100 times easier than being a stay-at-home mom.
I always knew that when I eventually had kids, I wanted to be the primary caretaker. However, I quickly realized that making cute lunchboxes and setting up sensory bins was not going to make me happy. So I needed to find a way to be both a present mom as well as fostering my ambition as a designer and an entrepreneur. So if you can relate, we hope you enjoy listening in on our conversations where we explore what life looks like as a multi-passionate mom.
I don't think a single episode has gone by where Hanne or I don't reference a book or a podcast that we listen to. We are avid readers and we credit all of our great ideas with the authors who taught them to us. We're not the originators of these ideas. And so we thought it would be fun to do an entire podcast episode dedicated to some of our favorite resources. We're going to be sharing mostly books, I think solely books, that we've read. Not all of them are necessarily parenting books. Some of them are personal development, but all of these books are ones that we've read and took something valuable away from them. So Hanne, do you want to kick it off with your first recommendation?
I'm actually gonna kick it off with I use the word reading even though I'm only listening.
Yes, okay, that's fair. I do listen, but I do have physical books, so I'm a bit of a bother, but mostly audio. So that's fair to say, audible.
Yeah, I love physical books and I would love to have like more time to read, but for some reason actually like audiobooks is my go-to. I listen on double speed so that
Same.
and not because
Same.
I'm like, oh, I need productivity, it needs to go faster. It's just because that way like my brain can actually better concentrate because it needs to make a little effort to actually like keep up with what's going on in the book. And so it helps me when I'm toddling around with my little one and just like I have something in my ears and I'm like still concentrated, or yeah, when we're commuting or whatever, like it's just such
That's
an
interesting.
enjoyable way to pass time and to have that time to like learn new ideas and have something to talk about. So for me, I definitely use audiobooks and books and all these resources that we're sharing also as like yeah, conversation openers with like people like, hey, I read this really cool book, and then yeah, to talk about something else than just the kids,
Makes
because
playdates more fun.
that can easily happen. But actually, okay, first one, this one I'm super excited about. I remember exactly where I was walking on the beach while I was listening to this book, and it is the book that made me want to have a boy. I know that's a big claim, and I know that a lot of, or I don't know, but I think for me, like when I thought babies, I automatically thought about girls. And I think it's maybe because I'm a woman, and so it's the only thing I can resonate with. Maybe because my puppets that I had, you know, like my dolls and that I had as a kid were all girl dolls, or at least in my mind, they were girl dolls, and you would like dress them up with little dresses and whatever. And so the idea of having a boy, it's not that I was against it, but I just didn't have any frame of reference for it. And while I was listening to this book, which is called The Amazing Development of Men by Alison A. Armstrong, and it's actually not a book, it's a lecture series, so it's really only available in audio. She talks with so much love and so much passion and so much joy about these little boys that she calls pages, and how they want to do things for their mom, and how you can like make them so happy by asking them to help you and giving them tasks. And so, yeah, it was while listening to that I was like, oh, I would be really, and I wasn't, I don't even know if I had a partner at the time. Like, I wasn't thinking about getting pregnant, but it was that moment where I was like, oh, it must be so fun to have a boy. So really grateful for that book. I would recommend it to, yeah, any mom of boys for sure, but basically anyone who wants to understand men better. And I know that in our friend group, it went around. So I read this book, and then, or I listened to this lecture series, and then I talked to my partner, and I was like, it's so funny because you are saying exactly what she was like talking about, and you're using the exact words that this woman is using in her book to describe men and how they talk about things. And he was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so he listened to it, and he was like, wow, this is actually like a really nice way to understand myself. And so he passed it around in the book club. And then, yeah, so very, very highly recommend it.
So I read that because you found it and then you passed it to your partner. Your partner and my husband are in a book club together. And I was listening with my husband when we were on a road trip. And I also really enjoyed that book. I learned so much. I think the biggest takeaway from that one for me was men are not hairy women. And it really helped in our marriage. For example, my husband, we would leave the house and he would be the one packing up the bag for the kids or getting them in the strollers. And we'd get outside and I would say, oh, did you grab diapers and wipes? Or did you grab a binky? Or did you grab the formula? And we were consistently caught in public without having the things that we needed. And this phrase, he's not a hairy woman, helped me move from a mindset of, oh my gosh, my husband, he's so useless and he's such a bad dad, or all these negative thoughts, to he is a more single focused thinker. And it's harder for him to remember a whole group of things all at once, where my mind can be very scattered and I'm much better at multitasking and remembering all these things. And that's not to put it all on me or excuse him. It just helped me approach the situation when I would talk to him about it and say, hey, babe, I really don't want to be the only one that needs to remember all these things. It helped me have that conversation from a place of love and understanding, remembering that he really thinks fundamentally different than how my brain works. And it was a more positive conversation then, because I wasn't approaching it as, why can't your brain think like mine? Why can't you remember, etc. So great recommendation. I'm actually going to piggyback off of that one that I wrote down. I really enjoyed this one, and it's all about women. Lecture series, same author, Alison Armstrong. It's called Understanding Women. And she really helped me. I was reading the book and I don't know if I was learning things, but I was listening like, yes, that's so true. I relate to that. And um, my husband and I adopted a phrase that she uses called the Berry Report. And she talks about how women communicate and how it helps us de-stress. And it's very important for us to be able to give this Berry Report at the end of the day or during the day. And it helped my husband know when, okay, my wife really needs me to listen and remember this information versus she's just communicating things to me because it's how her brain works. It helps her feel better. And so I would open a conversation with, okay, babe, this is just a Berry report. And, we'd have a nice conversation, but he can then relax because he doesn't have to solve a problem. I'm just venting. He doesn't have to write something down or remember something important. It's just something that kind of happened throughout the day. So that is another fun one by the same author that I would recommend as well.
I have a fun story to tell about that one because I went so deep in Alison Armstrong's stuff. I listened to everything she has, and I even read the books that weren't available on audio. So I absolutely love her stuff. The one about understanding women, like you said, the Berry report. So the idea of you're just telling everything, and in a very female way, where it's like, oh, and then we were walking in the street, and then I saw this dress, and that red dress. You remember Margarita from the party last week? She was wearing a red dress, and so that way of talking, and I don't consider myself a talker that way because I can recognize it in other women and be like, oh wow, like they can't keep one thread going. And and so I went home, and I entered the room, and I asked my partner. So he comes in. No, I come in. He asks me like, "Oh, how's your day?" And so I start like, "Oh yeah, I was having this conversation with my friend, and my friend, she's like doing this online program, and so I start talking, and I see my partner trying to concentrate on what I'm saying, but I can see him like, you know, like he's not really interested. And so I cut my story short, and I'm like, so how's your day? And he's like, good, productive.
Yes.
And I explode laughing. And when I say explode laughing, I have like a tears rolling down my cheeks. And he's like, what's going on? And I tell him, I'm like, hey, like I'm listening to this thing, understanding women, and about the difference in talking and the different reasons why we talk and what we relay. And one of the things is this, telling a story with all the details. And I thought I wasn't that bad. But then when I see the comparison with, when my partner is just like, good, productive. I'm like, wow, that's really all you're going to tell
Oh, I
me.
get
Like,
it.
that's as far as the conversation goes. Like, okay, yep, definitely female brain. Like, there's no doubt about it. So yeah, 100%. That's an amazing one. Talking about talking and listening, I'll give you my next resource. This is the book that I was listening to, and it's a book that's specifically about talking to kids, but they use examples on adults. And so while listening to the examples, I was like, oh, if you would compliment me that way, I can feel that I would find it condescending, or I would not accept the compliment because I wouldn't believe it, or it would actually diminish my self worth if somebody complimented my job in that way. So the book is called How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and Listen So Kids Will Talk.
I just downloaded that. I just downloaded that this morning, so I'm going to read that on my plane ride tomorrow. That's
All
so
right.
fun. I'm glad that it's been recommended by you now.
Yes, so it's by Adele Faber. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here, and Elaine Muslish. And it is eye-opening, to say the least. And the funny thing is, probably nothing will be completely shocking. Like a lot of it you will be like, oh yeah, that makes total sense, but we're not doing it. So
Mm.
it's actually very funny, where several times I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, that makes sense, that makes sense, and then I caught myself doing the exact opposite. Or like I caught myself just like falling into a completely different pattern. I'm like, oh, I am diminishing emotions, or I am not acknowledging how my kid is feeling, or and it's just so quick. And that's
Mm.
why I thought this book was amazing, and I've recommended it to so many people already. And I think it's going to become one of those books that I'm actually, going to stock and like send to people, because I think it's for kids, it's amazing. I can see how it would really really help your relationship with your kid. But I think even for adults, it's just such a good resource in how to really listen to someone, rather than being ready with your yeah, with your opinions and your solutions and whatever it is. And so, like I said, the reason that I think this book resonated so well with me is in the way it is written, where it always first starts with giving an adult example of the situation, and
Mm.
then it tells you like, and this is what happening with your kids. And so because you first experience it in a relatable way, rather than just listening to the kids examples, which sometimes, like I said, you can be like, oh yeah, that sounds logical, but you're not
Mm.
getting it. And so yeah, amazing book. There is another version from her daughter, actually, which is called How to Talk to Little Kids. If you listen to How to Talk to Kids, you don't need to have the one How to Talk to Little Kids. It's very, very similar, a bit different examples, but it really, in my opinion, didn't add that much to the conversation. So, but this one, super highly recommend.
Well, now I'm excited to read it. I feel like every book that I end up reading was somehow first recommended by you, including this next one, which again I found out from the book club, which was again passed on to the book club by you. And this book really changed how I approached parenting. Before I was even pregnant, I thought for sure I was going to be a Montessori mom and I was going to do all of the sensory bins and be really kid centric. And then this book fell into my lap and I listened to it, and all of that changed. And in the last episode, you actually said something. You said, wouldn't it be cool to go back and hear how you wanted to approach parenting and then see if you actually followed it and how it went? And I actually do have a video on YouTube called Is Your Life Over When You Have Kids? And I sat down when I was pregnant with my firstborn and I explained how this book changed my thinking and how I wanted to approach parenting. And I just re listened to it in July. And the whole time I was watching myself, I was like, yes, we do that. We do that. We still do that. And I was surprised because I would have thought that I think the standard is, oh, you think you're going to do one thing and then you do completely differently. But for the most part, I've actually managed to be the parent centric kind of parent that I wanted to be, the multi passionate mom, for example, and the boundaries that I had set with no sugar and no screen time I've been able to keep. So that was really exciting. And I owe my parenting approach almost entirely to this book, and that is Hunt, Gather, Parent by Micheline Duclef. I recommend it. I find her research, her observations very interesting, and it'll be um, interesting to see how if I'm able to apply the techniques to multiple kids, because she does have one kid and a lot of the techniques in that book are a bit time intensive. And so I'm predicting that it might be a little difficult for me to manage with multiple kids, but we'll see. I'm optimistic. And so that is my next recommendation.
Nice one. I'm gonna go into a different direction because we said multi passionate moms, and we already did an episode about finding your inner spark and creativity and so on. And this book makes a whole plea for creativity and why it is something that everybody needs. So, not just a nice to have, but why it's actually necessary. And it is written by Elizabeth Gilbert. So, you might know her from Eat, Pray, Love. And so, she wrote a book that is called Big Magic. Now, sounds a bit woo woo, but it is very much about creativity and how you can give it a place in your life, and how it is not about, um, making it your identity, becoming a writer or becoming, but yeah, how to create and not put too much pressure on yourself, and just the idea that actually humans are made to create things. And one of the phrases that I took from her book that I actually made a little art project about to make it into a nice quote to hang up in my office, my space, whatever you call it, that is called, "Your art doesn't have to be important." And for me, that really resonated, where often when I want to create something and I'm like, oh, but I'm not a tortured painter. So like I can't have these deep emotions from my childhood trauma because I don't have childhood trauma. I had very, very nice childhood. And so that whole idea of like your art doesn't have to change the world, it doesn't have to mean anything. And the way she says it is like, people were drawing penises on the wall just for fun. and that is also art. Like it doesn't have to be important. You can just do something because it's fun to do. And so, yeah, her book, if you've been thinking about doing something more creative, but you feel like you're not legit, or you feel like you don't have it in you, or you're not a real artist, or any of those imposter syndromes around your creativity, then I really, really recommend reading, listening to Big Magic.
That sounds like a great recommendation for multi passionate moms. I will have to download it. And following along the same trend of more lifestyle books, this next recommendation is one of my favorites. I listen to it multiple times a year. It's actually not a book, it's another lecture series. And it is all about your philosophy in life and how to approach life in a more positive manner. The author is a gem of a human. He's really entertaining in the way he speaks. His name is Jim Rohn, and the book is The Art of Exceptional Living. He goes through all things, um, as I said, personal philosophy, but also some parenting advice. He says, kids can do exceptional things if you give them exceptional things to do. And if you don't, there's no telling what they'll do. And that just resonates so hard for me with my little toddler right now. And he goes into finances a little bit, just managing your life in that sense a little bit, but just as a general overarching approaching life and your day to day in a more positive way, I highly, highly, highly recommend this one.
All right, I'll put that one next on my list of things to
Definitely
buy.
do.
I haven't listened to that one yet. Um, One that I want to recommend, which is going to be, again, bit out there, maybe a bit woo woo, very entertaining. I love books that are actually read by the author, because I think it often gives like an extra bit of depth to the book. And this is definitely one. It's a life story of somebody really, really interesting. It's called The Surrender Experiment by Michael A. Singer. And the premise of the book, so it is his life story. He managed to build a software company into a $1 billion company, but he surrenders to life. So he has given up on personal preferences in his life. And so he basically, whenever something arrives, he lets go of his personal preferences. So it's not like, oh, I feel like doing that or I don't feel like doing that. It's just like, oh, this seems to be the next step on my path.
In
Um,
terms of like a business opportunity
No,
or
so it's in everything in his life. It's actually like it's super interesting. It starts with, for example, the weather is like his first example, where he's just like, well, we have all these preferences about the weather and how the weather is gonna be, and but in the end, you can't you can't really influence it. And so, what if that's true with so many other things in your life, that the suffering actually comes from your preferences rather than what's
mm,
happening in your life. And um, that's his philosophy, and so he's living his life that way. And he wrote his life story, and what happens, and some of it is like really good, like this company that he managed to build. Some is pretty bad, where at one point he lost a lot of things, and uh, had a trial against him. And so, yeah, a lot of interesting things. And if you're into more of like the philosophy things of life, and just around this idea of a happy life, then I recommend reading this book.
he sounds a bit like a stoic with control the things you can control and let go of the things you can't control, like the weather, but almost practicing it to an extreme with kind of a unique angle on that. And I absolutely love philosophy books of that nature. So I'm sure I would like that one. And it kind of leads me into my next recommendation, which is written by a modern Stoic. He's known as a modern Stoic. His name's Ryan Holiday. I listen to this book whenever I'm I have a prolonged feeling of anxiousness or helplessness, or I am judging situations based on my preferences and putting a negative connotation on them when there doesn't need to be one. This book, this audiobook, just helps me reset. It's called The Obstacle is the Way, and it does just overview the Stoic philosophy, which I'm a huge fan of. I named my daughter after a famous Stoic philosopher. And yeah, I think this book is just a good entry level book for anyone interested in learning more about Stoicism. Instead of jumping right into Meditations by Aurelius, for example, it's a really easy read. It's also read by the author, which, as Hanne says, gives it a little extra um, personality, I would say, because he wrote the book and he's reading it in his tone. So very easy listen, very interesting, and for me, super helpful.
Um, Next recommendation, Not Nice by Dr. Aziz Ghazipura. If you find yourself having trouble setting boundaries or being a people pleaser, then I highly, highly recommend this book. It's I'm a recovered people pleaser, I would say. I definitely had tendencies, especially in my personal life. Like I never found it very difficult in my professional life to, I love public speaking. I had no problem being, CEO of a company. Interrupting people, imposing my meaning, like that was never my problem. But in a social setting, for example, inviting people and then not keeping myself accountable for how the people are feeling that I invited into my house. So constantly monitoring, like, is everybody feeling okay? Is everybody having fun? Is everybody enjoying themselves? And like really feeling like that was my thing to fix everybody's emotions and making sure that everybody was feeling good, was really, yeah, dampening my social life and the way I would enjoy actually being with other people, because I was just monitoring them so much and then making sure that I would do the thing that would, make sure that made them feel good. And so Not Nice just really gives specific examples, specific exercises that you can do. And I recently listened to it again, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm doing much better now. Like when I'm
So
taking
good.
the, he has like this little exercise with like a scale where you sit on like the people pleasing scale, and yeah, seeing that I'm way lower on that now is actually really interesting.
That is interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that about you, actually.
No, because I think
No.
you know me mostly from after that period.
Yeah. Yeah. Fortunately, I've never been, people pleasing has never been an issue of mine. I'm quite disagreeable. I don't think I'm an asshole, but I'm very much like your fun is your responsibility, whether you're at my house or we're at yours, and I'll take responsibility of how I'm feeling and all that. So I did read a book though called When I Say No, I Feel Guilty. And it sounds kind of similar. So I enjoyed that one. I would probably enjoy this one as well.
Yeah, it is. There's definitely, like I said, like it goes a bit through the different, yeah, the different ways of how people pleasing shows up. Because yeah, for some people it's as bad as not being able to tell that they would actually prefer going to a Chinese restaurant rather than,
Mhm.
eating pizza. Or watching this movie rather than that movie. And same thing, like I never really resonated with that. But then
Mhm.
certain of his examples, I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely like guilty of taking too much responsibility for how other people are feeling, and making, like, trying to put myself into a pretzel in in order to make sure that they don't feel that way. And that book was just really eye opening. One of the books, but yeah, that one was pretty eye opening.
So I might read it and realize, oh, I actually do people please in this way, and I didn't even realize that I was doing it, which is super cool. I'm going to rapid fire two books because I read them at the same time. They're both quick, easy, and they're related to pregnancy and kind of new motherhood. One of them is by a data analyst, and she approaches pregnancy from this perspective. So she went through all of the data and all of the research and studies that have been conducted on pregnant women and condenses it down into here's what the truth is about, for example, eating sushi while pregnant, drinking wine while pregnant, um, XYZ, whatever it is. Because there's so many, at least I felt this way when I got pregnant. It was okay, no more alcohol, no more sushi, I can't eat raw deli meat. And there were so many rules that I was trying to keep track of. And this book really just helped me realize which of those actually carried weight and some of those weren't as serious and maybe why they existed. So sushi is actually okay if they're fish that's low in mercury and you get it from a place that's not going to make you sick. If you wouldn't eat the gas station sushi not pregnant, don't eat it pregnant, that sort of thing. And so that was a huge relief for me because I didn't have to feel so constrained by pregnancy and stressed about what I was doing right or wrong or if I'm going to hurt my baby. And the other one is written very similar in the sense that it's condensed and to the point, which is how I like my books. And it's called Bottom Line for Baby. It's alphabetical. So she takes one topic that starts with each letter of the alphabet that is very common and talked about for new moms. And she just runs through the most up to date research and knowledge about it so that you just have the information at your fingertips and then you can decide how you want to approach that topic with your family.
I guess the first book you're talking about is Data Crib.
Oh, I didn't even say yeah. Yeah, sorry. The first book is so Bottom Line for Baby was the second one. The first one is called Expecting Better. It's by Emily Oster. Excuse me. Yeah. So the first book is Expecting Better by Emily Oster. And she also has a second book called Crib Sheet.
Crib Sheets, that's it. Yeah.
Crib Sheet. Yeah, really funny story. We started that book, which is the same idea as her Expecting Better for pregnancy, except it's for with newborns. We started that book. We were on a road trip, and my husband was driving. We were going through Poland, and she is describing the birth. And my husband is a very queasy person, and he doesn't do well with blood or anything of that nature. And he had to pull the car over in the middle of the freeway, put the hazard lights on, and stop driving. He was completely green just from the description of birth alone. And I hadn't even had my first daughter yet. So I was like, that was the first time I realized that, you know, started wondering how he was going to be in the delivery room. And so that was really funny. We never actually finished that book, but I imagine it's just as good or as good as Expecting Better.
Yeah, I tried because I liked the premise of the book, and this is, yeah, I don't know, I couldn't get through it. Maybe because some of the topics I think are more than just data. Um, yeah, crib sheet, because it's about sleeping, it's about formula versus breastfeeding, it's about like all that kind of stuff. And I think looking purely at data, you eliminate so much of the real experience. Yeah, and maybe just because a lot of the findings clashed with my own philosophies, like, and I think that's always, it's good to question your own philosophies and where they come from. It's also, yeah, I yeah, there was definitely a lot of things where I was like, yeah, okay, but obviously if you just give a kid food, like, they will survive, and technically they might even be healthy, but is that really the best way to for your kid to grow up? Like, I think anything that touches and the emotional and like the secure attachment styles and that kind of stuff is just so hard to measure and almost impossible to measure because it's often not like immediate. So it's like, it might be results from years later, just like we always joke that we'll probably f up our kids in some way, and then hopefully we'll also give them the tools to get through that. But I think if you realize now how much of your belief system, how much of your the way you act, how much of your people pleasing tendencies, how much of anything that you do is rooted in those first relationships that you had, and the way you were communicating and the way you were listened to and accepted, or then I find it very hard to just purely look at data. And yeah, and not to go into a sleep training versus non-sleep training discussion or whatever, because I think again there's so much personal stuff that goes into that. But that's the reason why I didn't get through. Like, I have it on my audio, and I just couldn't get through it.
So also couldn't get through it. I tend to stay away from parenting books that try to tell parents the best way to do, as you said, how to sleep or how to feed, because I think every family's different, every kid's different. And I've noticed just in my own two girls, their temperaments are so different. My toddler doesn't sleep in the same kind of pattern that my newborn does. And so I have to approach them differently. My personal parenting style is not to force a routine on one just because the other one is more naturally prone to that sleep routine, or different feeding routines. I'm a little more, how would you say, laissez-faire without being hands off. But I much prefer just looking at their cues and following their cues and kind of letting their natural tendencies guide my parenting, rather than me trying to listen to a book and hear what they have to say about it and then implement that on my children without considering how they are naturally. So I have to agree with
Yeah,
you.
so I think that probably the book around like pregnancy and so on, it's much easier to be like, okay, people actually don't get any bad diseases from eating sushi, like that's just a fact. And so it's not, whereas with the subject, when she tries to use the data on more parenting topics, yeah, maybe that would not, like, for me at least, that would not be a recommendation of one of her books.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
The last one that I want to mention is, and the reason I want to mention it is, first of all, because we already touched on this topic in some of the other episodes where we talk about the fact that women have a 28-day or something similar cycle, and that our energy and our mood and everything related to your um, yeah your physical being is in a 28-day cycle, whereas for guys it's on a 24-hour cycle. And we touched about on this subject around like productivity, why a lot of the productivity advice is very male oriented. And so if you are interested in that topic, I would highly recommend a book that's called The Optimized Woman. I do not know from whom it is anymore, but it is basically a guide to how to work with your cycle, to know when you are more social, or when you will probably be more prone to get stuff done, when you will be more creative, when you when you will want to cut your hair, or the moment that you absolutely need to change the decor in your house, or the moment that you're like not really happy to be around certain people. So it explains a bit more how to work with your cycle, and how to use those different moods and those different tendencies and those different gut feelings. I think that also plays into it, in a way to actually make that a positive thing. Because I think often in our society, um, it's seen as a negative thing. So when you're PMSing, it's seen as a negative thing, or when you're on your period, you actually have to slow it down a little bit. It seems like a negative thing. But reading this book really made me realize, like, oh, I have optimal times to plan certain things. And so I read it probably like, I want to say 3 years ago. Like it's been a while, and when I was still, very much working in the man's world, because software company, but trying to actually implement that and being like, oh, okay, my performance reviews with my colleagues, I can better plan that on the second week of my cycle, because that is when I'm more empathetic, when I have more um, more room for that kind of energy. Whereas on week one, I'm gonna be like super focused and just get stuff done,
Mhm.
and that is probably not the best time to have a performance review, because I won't have the
Patient.
capacity for it. And probably if I can avoid it, not to do it in week three when I'm already emotional, and then I will find it more difficult to approach certain difficult topics. So just realizing that you can, like, that there is maybe this option to schedule your time more around your natural cycle. And just for me, even just like realizing and being like, oh, okay, yeah, I am more emotional, or oh, I find it much more easy to do my admin work now rather than last week, or yeah, even just having those little clues, I found that really, really helpful. Unfortunately, no audiobook available, which is very, very sad. But available on Kindle. And yeah, and so it explains everything, and then it actually gives you like a day by day, almost like a plan. And so where you can like read a bit about it, have a couple of questions around that topic, and yeah, so go about your month that way, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I'm slowly getting more and more into this. And so I was really excited to hear that you had a book recommendation for me. I'm getting it hard copy, so I'll have to report back on that one, but I'm very excited about this whole topic. If you, the listener, have any books or podcasts that you listen to that just changed your life or that you think we would find interesting, please, please, please leave it in the description below. Otherwise, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Spotify, and we will see you in the next episode.